Welcome to Dead Man Talking. In celebration of 5,000 family members here at DMT, I have a fantastic, hot off the press, 3-part Dogman series that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. This one I dedicate to all of you that have supported me over this journey and given such nice feedback and comments, particularly to the series that I wrote, both series and just blowing me away, guys. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm glad you enjoyed the channel, and I hope to continue entertaining you all for years to come. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into tonight's first chapter of the series entitled The Dogman. Let's get straight into that. The walls of the new house crawled. Mum said it was just the heat warping the old wallpaper. We moved from Oregon to Louisiana when I was 12, a 35-hour drive littered with gas stations and motel rooms. I miss the rain and the soft skies of our green backyard with the tire swing. I miss my dad. Left behind with the swing in Oregon. The house we moved to was on the edge of the woods. Mosquitoes the only thing that stirred in the trees that seemed too tired to move in the heat. We unloaded our lives from the back seats of the car, the house a strange and echoing thing without any furniture except the kitchen appliances and the beds upstairs. We unpacked until the sky turned pink outside, sun slowly melting into the treetops. Mum and my little sister, Jamie, sat either side of me on the back porch, cross-legged without any chairs. We watched the light change, so different from the pale sunsets back home. And then I realised that this new sky was home. A rustle in the long grass growing head-high round the side of the clapboard house turned us away. A man walked towards us, shirt sleeves pushed past his elbows. Mum's face lit up with recognition as he raised one hand in greeting. "Bill, hi, come join us," she said to him, standing to her feet and cocking her hip. "Evening, Lila. Thought I'd come and check you and the girls were all settled." His voice rolled with a Louisiana lilt. Me and Jamie looked at each other. Bill reached the porch and bent down to our level, hands on his denim-covered knees. "Hey there, girlies." He got no reaction from us and chuckled over his shoulder to Mum, who smiled back. "Why?" he continued. "Both almost as pretty as your mama here." "Bill is the nice man who sold us this house," she explained. Was she blushing? Jamie scowled, freckles scrunching on the bridge of her nose. Bill and Mum talked a while on the porch and eventually we were sent to bed. Me and my little sister now shared a room painted white. The pink bunk bed in our old house wouldn't fit in a car, so now we slept in twin beds already there when we arrived, pushed to either side of the room with a cross hanging in the middle of the wall between them. We grew sleepless and afraid in those first few days, in the dark. Mum, too absent-minded to fill the empty light fixtures in the house until a week after we arrived. When the sun set, all that separated our bedroom from the river outside was the window, the lace curtain adrift in a breeze that pushed through the gaps in the frame. Jamie, long-haired and the braver of us, would watch our bedroom door every night until her eyes fell shut. Jamie was the only 7-year-old I knew who slept without stuffed animals. Instead, she cuddled a baseball bat our dad had given her the year before. Jamie missed her little league team almost as much as she missed him. I slept with my back to the door, terrified if I joined her I'd see something too. Jamie finally told me why over breakfast a few weeks later, milk dribbling down her chin from the Lucky Charms she was cramming into her mouth. He was there again. Mum sang softly to herself in the background as she poured more coffee. I had always loved the smell of it. I begged Mum to let me have a cup. She laughed when I spat the bitter liquid straight back into the cup. Mum hadn't laughed much lately, and the room had seemed lighter, sunshine creeping slow and hazy up over the countertops in the late morning. Jamie's words brought that dark feeling right back in, the one that kept me sleeping with my back to the door. What? Fear fluttered in my stomach, but I didn't know why. Jamie tilted her head. I was expecting her to giggle and tell me the punchline, or the story she had evidently made up. Instead, she stared right at me, tucking her hair behind her ear, serious and small at the kitchen table. The dogman? He was watching us all night, but I wouldn't let him in. She scrunched her nose, crunching her freckles, and ran out into the backyard, Mum calling after her not to stray too far into the trees. I have to drive into town to get some things. Why don't you go with her, baby? Mum asked, brushing my cheek with her thumb. The thought of being on my own in a house made my skin crawl, so I ran after Jamie, back door still swinging. She was standing right on the edge of the grass, rusted chain-link fence marking the border between our house and the woods. She was staring into the trees, so still I had to look twice to see if she was breathing. The air hung silent. I reached for her, suddenly afraid that if I didn't touch her, she would never move again, and I'd be left alone. "Jamie!" I called, hands outstretched like I was praying. She turned suddenly, hair falling into her eyes, she moved so fast. "What were you looking at?" I asked, pushing it from her face. I lifted my eyes past her into the trees. Shadows fell dark green into the tangles of the plants growing at their roots. Bugs singing in the swamp grass. There was nothing else there. "It was the dogman, Kenna. He was waving at me." She shrugged, soft cotton of a Care Bears t-shirt slipping off one sun-brown shoulder. I didn't wave back. I dragged her inside and locked the back door with the keys Mum kept on a hook by the window. Jamie argued with me the whole time, desperate to ride her bike around with the kids from the neighbouring houses down the red dirt roads. I refused and kept the door locked until Mum came back. Even when Jamie pulled my hair, it was past dinner time when she finally came home, arms full of groceries and brown paper bags. Jamie ran to her, yelling and waving her hands. She pulled up short in the hallway before she could reach her, as Bill stepped into the kitchen with a smile, bone white. "Hey there, girlies," he said, dumping more paper bags on the counter. "What's all this fussing?" Mum, Jamie said she saw..." Behind him, Jamie shook her head. Just once, but it was enough. "Something in the woods," I trowed off. Bill laughed and ruffled Jamie's hair. She ducked out from under his hand and moved across the room to stand next to me, tucking her fingers through the belt loops in my shorts like she did when she was nervous, when she needed something to hold on to. Mum smiled apologetically at Bill, and he chuckled, slow and loud in our small kitchen. Outside, June bugs twirled through the night air. "I'm sure these two just saw a critter or hunter after it out there in the woods. Nothing to concern yourself with, Lila," he said. And he stayed for dinner that night and sat at the porch with Mum long after we were sent to bed. I woke up in the blue dark, sheets sticking to my back. I needed water. I looked for Jamie curled around her baseball bat, hair a tangle of blonde on the pillow. I turned to the doorway. Mum would leave the now replaced hall light on for me at night, knowing I was scared of the dark but too proud to admit it at 12. Silhouetted in the yellow was the figure of a man. His body was tall and filled the frame. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for the fact that it was standing there. But its head, like a wolf, outlined in the dark. Two white eyes stared at me, passive and still, and I could hear it breathe, panting, like a dog. Footsteps on the stairs stopped halfway. Telltale creak of the old boards. Too scared to do anything but lie still, and I fell back to sleep, uneasy. My pillow smelled like the detergent Mum used back home, when I dreamed of running through the woods in my bare feet. I told no one. Every night Jamie still watched our bedroom door, green eyes wide in the dark, and now I joined her. The days kept coming, sun-drenched and slow. Jamie, loud and brave with dirt under her nails, made friends with the kids in the houses around us, and every day we'd run wild with them in the woods. Warnings from parents about the dangers of the river always ignored. I spent my days with the boy who lived in one of the story houses opposite us. Jake. He was a soft-spoken and a year older than me, who lived in the one-story house opposite us. Jake. He was soft-spoken and a year older than me. We met when his mum, Amy, banged on our door one Wednesday afternoon, dragging him by the hand. She had an infectious laugh and would often come over unannounced after that, bringing Mum sweet tea and cigarettes. They would sit on lawn chairs and talk until the moths came out to kiss the porch lights. Jake loved to draw, and I would sit with him for hours by the river, watching him capture the catfish that dreamed beneath the surface, or the dragonflies with their hum of the wings. Louisiana was growing on me and Jamie, and finally settling in amongst the hazy summer nights and cricket sounds. That was until she disappeared. The Dogman, Part 2. The week before my little sister disappeared began like any other that summer. The days stretched golden and lazy, and Jamie and her friends had begun to swim in the river on days when the heat was too much. You could hear the sounds of their laughter bouncing through the woods, shaking the birds from the trees and waking the butterflies from the wildflowers that grew at the edge of the bayou. Because of this, Jake and I had started venturing further and further into the woods to escape the noise that scared off the animals he would try to patiently draw. I was angry with Jamie, always bringing noise and chaos wherever she went, but Jake didn't mind. It was a Saturday in late July, and me and Jake were walking deeper, past the creek and Whitecross now to the cypress tree, trailing Spanish moss like a child bride. Every so often I'd catch him looking back at me, as if he had to check I was still there. We reached the clearing and Jake abruptly stopped. A tree grew alone in the centre, older than us both, trunk weathered and sun bleached by the years. Covering the base in heaps were Walmart bouquets of baby's breath pink flowers, wrapped in plastic shrouds and wiltering in the heat. Bouquets piled underneath had begun to rot in the dirt, and butterflies landed hesitant among the fresh flowers, wary of the smell of death beneath. Stuffed toys sat atop the decay, a pink bunny missing an eye and a lamb with a satin bow round its neck stained with mud. Candles, and some painted with a faded Virgin Mary, like the ones in church, were lit among the toys and flowers and cards, a steady flicker in the shade of the trees. I wondered who was lighting them. A bottle of Jack Daniels filled with white roses jostled for space, with a small statue of an angel, face in its hands, and covering everything were the photographs of the same 4 girls. Some were middle school pictures, smiling for the camera with gaps in their teeth, photo frames starting to rust. Some were family photographs, some baby pictures. A girl stood waist deep in the river in a sundress, grinning at the camera. A girl sat in the bed of a blue pickup truck, arms around a doe-eyed Labrador. A girl stood hand in hand with a woman, both in their Sunday best, ribbons in their hair. A girl blew out 7 candles on her birthday cake, eyes squeezed shut as she wished. All of them with long, blonde hair. I wrapped my arms around myself, digging my nails into my skin, and felt cold despite the sun. Jake, I turned to him, uncertain. He scrubbed at his eyes, hands coming away wet. He didn't answer, just grabbed my hand and pulled me away. He wouldn't talk to me as he pulled me back through the woods, ignoring all my questions until I gave up asking. We cleared the trees and jumped the fence into my backyard. He was still holding my hand. Jake sat with me on the porch and took my shoulders, turning me to face him. I wasn't going to tell you, because my mama said it would just scare you and all. He looked away for a minute, mouth downturned, hands of weight on my shoulders. That right there on that tree, those girls disappeared last year. Nobody knows what happened or nothing, just that they never came back. I had never seen a boy cry before and caught one of the tears dripping off his chin on my thumb. I couldn't bear to see it fall. He smiled for me, shaky but sweet. One of them was my cousin, Abby. He hesitated. I told her to ride a bike. He turned to face the trees as if to say that was that. I sad with the memory. 13 and already too sad. We sat in easy silence on the porch, leaning against each other until it turned dark and Jamie emerged from the woods like some half-wild thing, grinning from ear to ear with leaves in her hair. I grabbed her into a hug, closing my eyes and resting my chin on her head. She complained I was crushing her to death, but hugged me back just as hard. That night, Jake taught me and Jamie to catch lightning bugs with her bare hands, laughing as Jamie screamed with delight, chasing them like stars around her backyard, wishing again and again on every one she caught. Jake whispered to me that soon the weather would turn too cold for them and they would curl up and die in the grass. But for now, they were here, and they were beautiful. Amy came to pick him up on her way back from work, saying his daddy had dinner waiting. She asked me where Mum was, brow crinkling with worry, probably wondering if me and Jamie had any dinner waiting for us. I just smiled and said she'd be home soon. I made me and Jamie peanut butter sandwiches and brushed her hair in front of the TV, trying it into 2 perfect blonde braids to keep out the tangles. She fell asleep with her head on my lap and thumb in her mouth. Mum finally came home. Bill was with her, but I knew that even before he stepped in after her, hearing the low purr of his truck out in the driveway. She stumbled when she bent to kiss my cheek, her lipstick smeared and her breath strange and fruity, making my eyes water. Bill leaned against the doorway, smiling in his blue jeans as Mum giggled when she knocked over my glass of juice with a high heel. I carried Jamie upstairs. her body heavy with sleep, and put her to bed, carefully tucking her baseball bat in between her hands. I fell asleep to the sound of Mum laughing too loud, TV blaring white noise. As I closed my eyes, I thought I saw a silhouette in the doorway, but I wasn't scared because the head wasn't a dog's head. It was a man's. I woke up to Mum screaming. It was morning and Jamie's bed was empty. I ran downstairs, 2 at a time, heart beat like a baby bird learning to fly. Mum was in the kitchen, pancakes on the stove, turning the room syrupy. Jamie was sat at the kitchen table. The 2 perfect braids I'd done for her the night before were gone. Her hair was gone, hacked away to just above her shoulders. Mum whirled around and pointed the spatula at me accusingly. "Kenna, did you do this to your sister?" Her voice was strained as she tried to not shout. Mum never yelled at us. I shook my head, numb. Mum nodded, turning off the stove and sitting down, pulling Jamie onto her lap. Mum held her face in her hands, forcing her to look into her eyes. "Baby, I'm not mad," she said, voice now calm. "I just want to know why." She ran a hand through Jamie's ragged hair, distracted. She held out an arm for me and I leaned against her, breathing in. She smelled like herself again, like detergent and honey, like Mum. "I know this move hasn't been easy," she said, brushing her eyes clear. "I know I haven't made it easy," she continued, voice quiet. "This is my fault," she finished, sad but steady. We sat and held each other in the sun-filled kitchen, and it felt like we had held each other long enough. The cracks that had slowly grown in our lives would mend. Mum took Jamie upstairs to the bathroom and sat her on the side of the tub, fixing the ends of her hair as best she could with the now scissors. The phone rang from downstairs, calling her away. Jamie turned to me, eyes wide and solemn. She tugged me towards her, small hands hooking onto my belt loops, determined. "I didn't do it, Kenna," she said. "It was the dogman. He came and he took my hair." She looked out into the hall to check Mum wasn't coming back. "I don't want to sleep in our room tonight, Kenna, okay? I'm scared." "Okay," I said. That night, me and Jamie built a blanket fort in the living room, saying we wanted to sleep there. Mum just laughed at us and helped, even strung up some Christmas lights inside. Mum cooked dinner for the first time all week, a real dinner, not just a microwave meal. We ate inside the fort, faces covered in the glow from the rainbow lights, blues and reds and pinks. We had built the fort around the TV, and Mum stuck on an old movie that I hadn't watched since I was Jamie's age. A knock on the front door pulled us away from the screen. Mum untangled herself from the nest of cushions and blankets and stuffed toys and went to answer. I suddenly felt like Mum was on a boat being pulled out to sea, leaving me and Jamie behind on the shore, left helpless by the tide. I could tell from the way her voice changed. It was Bill. I tried to focus on the movie, but I heard Mum go upstairs and come down a few minutes later. The sound of her high heels on the wooden floor. She lifted back the entrance to the fort and smiled, mouth shiny with red to her lipstick. "I'm going out with Bill tonight. We'll only be a few hours. Will you two be all right?" I could smell her perfume, the one she used to wear for Dad. "I don't have to go," she said. And I noticed she had done her hair, piled carefully on top of her head. She looked so pretty in the Christmas-like glow, younger in the half-dark. I just wanted her to be happy. I shoved Jamie, and she smiled up at Mum and me. "Go, Mama, we'll be okay," she said, glaring at me and rubbing her arm. Mum blew a kiss and she was gone, perfume left behind. The front door slammed and we were alone. Jamie punched me in the arm hard. Payback. I glared at her until my mouth twitched and we both dissolved into giggles. Settling down to finish the movie, we fell asleep with our legs overlapping, Jamie's steady breathing lulling me to sleep like the ocean. The next morning, I woke up alone. A mess of blankets next to me marked where Jamie had been. I stretched and crawled out of the fort. The kitchen was dark, and I drank an orange juice straight from the carton in the white fridge light. The morning was blue outside, dawn not quite ready to replace the dark. A few birds braved the empty garden and the trees rustled in the wind. I sat on the porch with my feet in the grass and watched dawn slowly light up the clouds, a blur of day's yellows and peach. I assumed Jamie had gone to sleep with Mum upstairs or was back in our room. I was wrong. I went upstairs to drag her out of bed, bored of being alone. Checked our room. The bed's unslept in and empty. The window hung open. Room turned cold with night. A moth hid in a corner of the lace curtains as I went to close the window. I watched it raise its brown wings, paper thin, and early light through the glass making them see-through. I brushed it with my hand until it flew away, and I closed the window behind it. I checked the bathroom. Also empty. I checked Mum's room. Mum lay in her underwear, above the covers. Her hair had come loose across her face in gentle waves. She was beautiful, even with last night's makeup smudged across her eyes. Her shoes and clothes were scattered on the floor where she'd left them. I hadn't heard her come in, but it had obviously been late. She was sleeping alone. I shook her awake, panic crawling the walls of my ribcage. We ran back downstairs, checked the kitchen. Empty. Ran into the living room, tearing apart the fort, throwing pillows and blankets. Empty. We ran outside, into the garden. Also empty. I screamed for my sister's name into the trees, and they gave no reply. Jamie was gone. The Dogman. Part 3. Final update. I didn't cry when the police came from the next town over. Blue and red lights filling our driveway. Moon belly filling the sky. I didn't cry when an officer with worn out hands sat with me on the porch listening to the night sounds of cicadas, carefully asking me questions about my sister. I said it was the Dogman and he didn't listen. I didn't cry the next day when volunteers took to the forest in the early morning mist, sunlight like smoke through the trees swallowing their bodies as they walked deeper, calling her name. I didn't cry when Mum wouldn't get out of bed, wouldn't shower, wouldn't eat, wouldn't call Dad. Sometimes I'd join her, lying side by side staring up at the ceiling until the day faded and the hum of the electric fan the only sound in the room. I didn't cry when I dreamed about Jamie every night, climbing trees that stretched impossible into the sky, branches like hands. And I didn't cry when I had nightmares about Jamie, buried in the dirt with worms in her mouth, green eyes closed. I took to sleeping in Jamie's bed. It smelled like her, sweet with sweat and that strawberry shampoo that she loved. I'd leave the window open for the bugs and the stars, hoping that suddenly I'd hear a voice outside saying it was all a mistake. She'd been lost for so long and was worried Mum would be mad, but could she please come home now? And every night I watched that doorway, waiting. And every night he came. The Dogman. I'd stare until tears came, angry and afraid in the dark where nobody could see them fall except for him and his white eyes. I wanted to ask why he took her and not me, why he wouldn't leave us alone, why he wouldn't give her back. But I was always too scared to speak, so we'd stare at each other in silence. The slow roll of his breathing, gaze fixed on me, lucid and pale, moon reflections in his eyes. Neighbours came in waves with casseroles and kind words. "We're praying for you, darling. You and your sister," they would say, regretful in our own living room. "She'll be home soon. God will see to that," they would promise, kissing my cheek. But they knew God couldn't reach us here, out in the swamp and the red dirt roads. God had turned away from the river trees, swaying like a preacher's hands on a Sunday. Amy was there every day without fail to check on Mum, always bringing something new to feed me. Bill was there every day too. After he'd finished combing the cow fields and woods with other volunteers, he'd knock on the front door, trailing mud and weeds in on his boots. I dreaded that sound. 3 steady knocks, like bruises on my skin. He'd go up to see Mum a while and then leave, smiling at me and shaking his head with another day passed empty without Jamie. A week came and went. 7 days of empty house that echoed strange, like when we had first moved in. 7 days spent trying to reach Mum, who had finally drifted out to sea, except now I was standing left beyond the shore, all alone. It was a Sunday evening, sky turning shy pink and birds flying home. Amy and Jake had just left. Amy had brought Jake with her, the first time I'd seen him since that night catching fireflies in the garden. He'd pulled me into a hug the second he saw me, not by the slightest bit shy, like most teenage boys, just warm and heavy with the sun. Smiling like the bonfire he'd been helping his dad build, he said nothing. Didn't need to. Mum was sleeping upstairs after a long conversation with Amy. I thought I'd heard her crying again, but I was too tired to go and see. I was too tired of watching her sleep through the days, too tired of hearing her cry with the door closed when she thought that I couldn't hear. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cold metal of the fridge, curled up with my arms over my head and my knees pressed into my chest, too tired and sad to cry. I missed Jamie so much in that moment it felt like I was drowning in the kitchen, table and chairs washing away on the tide, salt staining the faded wallpaper and fish circling the ceiling fan as I sank to the bottom of the ocean. I missed the way that she would eat all the marshmallows out of the Lucky Charms, leaving me with the only bland cereal. I missed the way that she would fight for the remote with me, pulling my hair and sinking her tiny nails into my hands. I missed the noise and the chaos she brought with her everywhere. Everything funny to her, everything bright and brand new. She was so small and so brave, and I pressed my hands over my eyes until I saw static, imagining her drowned in the creek, lost in the woods, buried in the ground, taken by the Dogman. I missed her like an ache in the back of my teeth. It was my fault, I realised. I should have told someone sooner about the Dogman. I should have been there to protect her. I wanted to find her so badly it made my head hurt. Something hard pressed against the back, and I twisted to move it. A fridge magnet shaped like a frog, pinning to the fridge in a photo of me and Jamie at the beach last year. I stared at our faces, tiny on film, smiles slightly blurry. I grabbed the photo and ran, jumping the chain link fence and separated our backyard from the woods, my shoes forgotten. I ran through the trees, mud and grass and leaves against my bare feet. The evening air was hot and warm, and I could feel it on my arms as I pushed through it, running beneath the sky as pink faded into purple and then grey as the sun began to sink lower. I found the clearing, breathing hard, dizzy with it, staring up at the tree, covered with its photos and flowers. Once again I wondered who was lighting the candles, before I collapsed into the dirt, digging into it until it found its way under my nails. I screamed, an animal sound, sobs, shaking my ribs until it felt like they would fall from my chest. The candles glowed steady, watching me as I held out the photograph of me and Jamie, like an offering. I folded it in half so it showed only my sister, smiling over at me, now unseen like a ghost. I placed it carefully against the weathered statue of the Virgin Mary. She was a mother once too, and I hoped she would look after Jamie. I cried in the warmth of the candlelight, in the same position I'd been in earlier, with my arms over my head, hoping I could hold the cracks together long enough before I broke. I woke up cold, small against the base of the tree, surrounded by the candlelight. The moon hung half full in the sky, constellations flung across the swirling black. I wasn't alone. The Dogman stood, head tilted slightly to the left, watching me. He tilted his head the other way when he noticed I was awake, watching him. I stood, feet slipping over the piles of flowers and toys, pushing myself up onto the rough bark of the tree. I wasn't scared anymore. I didn't care if he wanted to hurt me too. I bared my teeth. He shook his head. I drew a breath, confused. He stepped into the light. Some instinct inside of me older than I was howled and told me to run. I stayed. In the lights I could see he was more dog than man. His legs were as if a dog was standing on 2 feet, upright like a person but still animal, still unnatural. The fur that covered him from the ribcage down was thick and shone like the creek water in the dark. His chest was pale, undoubtedly human, and littered with scars and strange black ink, symbols and pictures that seemed to shift and change as he moved. Human hands, nails long and dirt-caked, but his head was the head of a black dog. Like an Alsatian, ears high like a wolf. His eyes were pure white, pupilless and half lost in the black of his fur. The Dogman smiled. I wanted to be brave like Jamie, but I still took a step back, my body moving for me when faced with all of those teeth. He shook his head again, and we stared at each other in silence, soft wind blowing through the trees, lifting its hands gentle through my hair, rippling his fur slowly. He sank to the ground and crouched, arranging himself so he cross-legged with his hands on his legs. He tilted his head again, eyes calm, eyes almost human. With nothing else to do, I crouched and mirrored him, crossing my bare legs with my bare hands rested on my knees. I looked at him and felt safe. He wasn't there to hurt me. Then the Dogman stood, movements careful and slow, and reassuring. He held out his hand and I took it. Together, we walked through the trees and into the dark. We walked, dreamlike, through the woods, stars ahaze above us. The Dogman never looked back, his hand warm and twice the size of my own. We walked until we cleared the forest and reached a house, blue paint peeling, chain-link fence wrapping the property light. Rot crept across the porch, empty save for a broken rocking chair that creaked in the wind. The grass in the backyard lay dead. Water hadn't touched the ground for a long time. 4 small saplings grew in a row against the fence, the first growing tallest with a few buds and leaves. At the end of the row was a hole for the 5th. I knew whose house this was. The Dogman smiled. I woke up in my own bed, dirt on my feet and baby breath flowers knotted into the ends of my hair. I sat at the kitchen table, feet swinging off the ground. I wasn't quite tall enough to reach. As I picked up the phone, I dialed and looked out of the window as the sun rose, a bright and living thing, and for a minute turning everything gold. The first person I called was Dad. I heard his voice over the phone for the first time in months and felt like coming home. The second person I called was the police. For the second time that week, our driveway filled with blue and red lights in the early morning. But this time, they weren't too late. The blue house with the peeling paint and the decaying porch belonged to Bill Lafayette. Officers kicked in the door into the sound of the birdsong, caught him passed out on a couch, kids' cartoons blaring on the TV. Jamie was sat in the back room, with the windows boarded up, and an officer carried her out into the sunlight to me and Mum, waiting in the back of the police car. She ran to us on legs shaky from a week of being chained to a wall. She brushed past Mum and threw her arms around me. I picked her up and held her so tight, tight enough so the cracks that had been growing started to mend. She complained, and I was crushing her to death. But neither of us let go. Bill had taken Jamie from the living room floor when we slept that Sunday night. Mum passed out drunk upstairs. He had kept her in the room for a week. The police interviewed her for a whole day, gathering enough evidence to get him a life sentence. Then they interviewed me. They asked me how I'd known where she was, and I said I dreamt it. They left it at that. They sent Jamie to hospital, an hour's drive away, to run tests and check she was okay. She told me and Mum as we sat by her, IV drip and steady beep of a heart monitor background noise. Bill hadn't touched her, she said. He'd been so angry, but she didn't know why. He'd hit her, pulling at her hair again and again, screaming about how she was wrong. She was all wrong. The 4 trees in his backyard marked the bodies of Gracie Freeman, Becky Adams, Jenny Hayes, and Abigail Holtman. All 7 years old, all with long, blonde hair. Bill had been planning on planting a 5th. Dad arrived the next day. He stumbled from the car, eyes bloodshot and hands shaking. He had been driving since I called him, through the night, stopping once to sleep and once to refuel. I imagined him on the highway in the dark, headlights in halos around him, gripping the wheel. He held Jamie in one arm and Mum in the other, and they cried into his shoulders. He looked up at me from behind their blonde heads and smiled, hair as dark as mine. Jake gave me a drawing he had done, me with my legs in the river and my hair in a braid down my back. Written on the back in pencil was his phone number and 2 words. Thank you. Amy kissed me on the forehead and said she'd miss me, but she was glad we were leaving. I said the same. We packed up our entire lives into the back seats of the car and made the 35-hour drive back to Oregon. Back home. Me and Jamie stared out the back window of the car as we drove away. Red dirt road beneath the wheels. White house growing small into the rearview mirror. We passed by the whole wheat fields. Cows grazing in the Louisiana sunshine. Brown with their sleepy eyes. A billboard flashed past, green-painted letters letting us know God is watching. We passed the swamp, trees slow growing beneath the moss in the shade. We passed the woods and there he stood at the tree line, head tilted to the side with his wide white eyes. Me and Jamie waved and the Dogman smiled. Wow. Absolutely wonderful story there. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I. Big thank you to the author there over on Reddit, Coney-IslandQueen. Cannot wait to see what else you produce in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed that. As I say, always do let me know down below what you thought. Please do share and like. And remember guys, sometimes the Dogman legends have told of protective and guarding spirits, particularly in the Irish mythology. So, not always the evil creatures that they pertain to be in many videos across the internet. But I leave you guys the decision on where you think the Dogman truly sits. Is he friend or foe? But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.